We're going to move on to questions, but just to start off, I just have one or two questions. As was the first one is to Michelle. One of the things that strikes me in terms of the divide between what is required in terms of hepatitis C program, which is to respond to the needs of up to 50,000 individuals with which would require a budget of nearly 3 billion, and only being able to, and again maximising this because it's moved from 350 to 2,000 in a few years. What is the impact and toll upon the programme team, knowing that the struggle of knowing where that huge gap and disparity is? I wonder if you can tell me, because sometimes we forget that. We can see it with frontline staff in terms of people who are involved in policy, procurement, behind the scenes.
I'd say we've a huge team that work within the National Hepatitis Treatment Programme. I think the leadership in the programme has been really strong. I think we've got really strong clinical leadership, and the structures that we have put in place from the beginning have really helped to, I suppose, to support the complexities of delivering a programme of that scale. As I mentioned, a big component of the work that we do, unfortunately, involves having to collect quite an amount of data to enable us to go back to suppliers and collect the savings and collect the rebates. So there's quite a lot of work involved in that. I suppose a few years back, some of those roles didn't even exist, but we've had to, build in that expertise into the programme. I suppose what strikes me in the Hep C programme, particularly, is the people generally have worked in it for a really long time, and I think that a lot of the people who work with us have been there since the beginning of, when a lot of these patients would have been diagnosed. And I think the structure that we have in Ireland to enable the continued progression of the programme is really good. So I suppose, as I mentioned, we're moving the Hep C treatment programme into community settings, and that's a piece of work that I was really proud to kind of get over the line and commence before I moved into my new position. So I suppose there's a lot of dedicated people who've worked for a very long time in the area, and we've had to bring in a lot of new skills and expertise along the way as well. So I suppose we've got a collective vision, which is really important as well, which is, I put it into one of my slides, where everybody wants to get to hepatitis C becoming a rare disease, and I think we're well on the way after 4 years of achieving that, which has been helped greatly with the work that we've done in reducing the cost of the drugs and opening the access then to patients there.
Do you think that is possible within a profit-driven system?
I don't think it's possible if the way the profits are given to the companies is through the grant of monopoly. I think it is possible through a system of market entry rewards for the companies make profits, they're incentivized by profits, but the reward is not a high price on a drug, a monopoly on the drug that excludes people, but rather it's a market entry reward. It's a separate thing from what the patient faces. I think the only way we really have fairness in access is if the prices fall to as low as possible. That's the only thing that's really going to reach people. And you talk about Ireland, but the problems you have are far worse in developing countries. And the idea that people are comfortable with maybe 80% of the world's population having far worse access, I think they shouldn't be comfortable with that. We should all want everyone to have access.
I think it's interesting to entangle the question a bit, because do we need high levels of profits to be able to engage in research and development? I mean, I'm turning the question upside down, then I would say no, it's not the case. If you know that companies are currently spending more on buying their own shares back on marketing, for example, than on research and development, then less a loss for society that we all are contributing to high prices to these kind of costs or expenses for the company. So I don't think that we need high levels of profits to be able to engage in a good way of research and development. There are just more efficient ways, as Jamie presented a couple of models today. My own organization created in 2003 the Drugs for Neglected Disease Initiative, which engages in research and development of new medicines and treatments for neglected diseases, for which the pharmaceutical industry has no interest, because it's the other side of the coin as well. There are diseases which are just not profitable because only poor people get them, and tropical neglected diseases are a typical example for that. There's also a little profit to make on new antibiotics in the current model, the monopoly-driven model. So that means that the profit-driven model is just not really the only model that works, and it's not a requirement to be able to invest in research and development.
My name is Nick McGrath, the Chief Executive for Rare Diseases Ireland, a patient advocacy organisation, a national alliance for rare disease community in Ireland. And this was largely a question to Michelle in terms of the Hep C work that she did, and that we would welcome you into the rare disease community if and when that arises, definitely. But what I found very interesting around your approach was there appeared to be a much more patient involvement in how are we going to tackle this challenge, what needed to be done on the ground, how are we going to gather the information that's needed to determine the effectiveness of the drugs, look at the pricing, look at all of those elements, and that largely that's a unique situation in the Irish healthcare system, that for most, disease states, that's not the truth, that's not what's happening. And certainly from our perspective, when we look at access to medicines, and it was described earlier on as what happens in the black box that is the HSE, those decisions and how long they're taking and stuff. And that's where we as patients are absolutely challenged, is that we're not being involved in any of those, not necessarily that we have to get down to the nitty-gritty of what is the actual price, but what's the benefit of the drug, how is it going to impact on us. And I think that if there was more open disclosure and involvement of patients, some of these questions could be answered quite simply by, it's not worth it. We don't think it's worth it. Or if we're on a drug, like for example Orkambi, and it's not effective, take me off the drug. I don't want to be on a drug that's not effective, but the system doesn't allow us to get that type of involvement. And I wonder, is there something that we could do, notwithstanding changing the patent system is an ideal scenario, it's going to take a lot of work internationally, but actually within Ireland, I think that we could do some short shocks and get through some of this in the next handful of years and actually benefit all of us.
Okay, thank you. And gentlemen here.
So my question's for
Just tell us
my name's Donald. My question's for Aoife, if possible. And my question relates to what you think is the toll that being an advocate and having to stand up for access to medications can have on patients. So what I mean by that is that, obviously it's very important that patients are involved in advocating at every level of discussions about access to medication, but I often feel that when you see, let's say it's a collection of people protesting outside Leinster House to look for medication, or commonly on social media even you see people with GoFundMe pages to get access to such and such treatment. I often think there's kind of two harms that have been done there, which is the first being that they haven't got the treatment they needed, and so that's obviously wrong. But the second harm, which is kind of not really calculated, is just the indignity of having to do that. It's just such a scandal, I think, when you see, let's say, parents of kids with spinal muscular atrophy, their lives are already really tough for lots of reasons. I just think it's always so wrong that they have to effectively lower themselves to beg for medication, television, whatever. So just from your own experience being a patient advocate, do you feel that that can take a toll on patients to have to engage in effectively political lobbying for healthcare that they kind of deserve to get without having to do so?
Aoife, did you want to answer that first of all?
Is this on? Yes. Absolutely, it absolutely takes a toll on the patient advocate. There's no point in saying anything else, and you're absolutely right. It comes at it. There's a number of costs associated with it. So there is that as you say, the first thing is that they know that there is a treatment available that they're unable to access, and that in itself is heartbreaking. In many circumstances, it's absolutely heartbreaking. And then, as you say, another element of it is that they have to go and ask. They are asking for access to something, and as you say, they have to. First of all, it's a disclosure issue, so you no longer have, you've then made a choice that you've disclosed your condition to try and rectify something, but once something like that is out there, you can't take it back, and I think that it sometimes forces people to come out with something that they might not have otherwise, they might not have wanted to, I suppose, otherwise, but they were kind of left with no choice. And then there's lots of other implications with it. I mean, even the kind of, logistics and financial element of trying to drive something like that forward. And even, you see families come up the country from here, there and everywhere to protest outside Leinster House, and that's often a day off work for parents. It's transport. There's lots of ways in which that impacts patient advocates, and there's a huge cost that comes with it. And then there's no guarantee at the end of the day. So I suppose that's the other side of it too, where it would be fantastic if all of that investment actually always resulted in a positive result for the patient advocate, but it doesn't. And I suppose that's a frustrating thing. After a while, that begins to wear on patient advocates, and when you're constantly told no and have to fight every step of the way, I mean, that responsibility should never be on the patient in the first place. So it comes obviously at a huge cost. I hope that answers your question. Thanks.
I think it's an important question in terms of the cost on the individuals who step forward, the courage of stepping forward to advocate, to campaign for human rights-based issues. We shouldn't forget the stress, the impact of public disclosure that can have on the individual. So I think it is an important issue to highlight. And next to Michelle, I wonder whether you could address the issue in terms of the HSE, the black box, and probably what could be done better.
I don't know if I'll ever understand the black box completely and the HSE, but I'll just make the point that our colleague from RCSI Ireland brought up just in relation to how we have included, I suppose, the patient advocates in the approach that we've taken within the hepatitis C area. So I suppose it's important that people understand that there was a whole kind of programmatic approach that we took to the National Hep C Treatment Programme, and I guess the landscape within hepatitis C in Ireland is quite difficult, and I think the people who really understand fully that landscape of where the patients are and how, I suppose, they're living with their condition and where they can best access care really only comes from them. So I suppose in designing and leading and establishing a national programme, it's virtually impossible to kind of get beyond the first couple of years if you haven't engaged truly with the population who are really the big target population for the Hep C treatment programme. I suppose that I wouldn't have known the landscape that well at all. I worked in the Hep C area for a long time before we established the Hep C treatment programme, but I worked with a very particular, specific group of patients, those who were infected through blood products, and I guess the landscape that they lived in is completely different to the landscape where the majority of our Hep C patients are living. About 80% of our population would be from backgrounds of drug addiction, current and former drug addiction. So I suppose it's a difficult landscape for us to negotiate and to build a treatment programme around unless we have the experts from that area, i.e. the patients sitting at the table. So I suppose for me it was kind of a no-brainer. I know the programmes in the HSE will have included the patients who are specific to that particular area, and it's a model that I work very comfortably in. But I think the leadership of the individual programmes, I think, has to be open to that level of engagement and inclusion. I think if you have that at the start, that's usually a good entry point then for the inclusion, be it a population of patients where there are, like some of the patients that you would work with, where there are handfuls of patients living with a particular disease and the drug to treat that comes with a high price tag. So I think regardless of the size of the programme, I think the inclusion of the patient advocacies in the kind of co-design of the programme, the collaboration with the models of care that are designed, and then the engagement with the suppliers of drugs and negotiating on the costs. I think they have a role in every single part of that, no matter how big or small that patient population is.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair. Yeah, finish, John.
Thank you. I also like to raise a point on this, because you mentioned the change to the patent system internationally will take many years, and you're probably right, but nevertheless, I think it's interesting to know that at the European level, where the patent system, because it's a European Union level competency, the patent system, where the patent system or the European Union has the responsibility of the patent system, a number of discussions have started to take place since 2016 about the impact of intellectual property rights and access to medicines. Some studies have been published in the last years, and the discussion is ongoing. And actually, in this fall, a report is expected on the orphan drug designation, so how drugs are developed for rare diseases. And based on that, there will be discussions on how more effectively to drive innovation in this sector as well. So there are definitely opportunities to challenge the current system. And I'm not challenging the system just to challenge the system, but for the sake of having innovation for the patients. And that's what we need to focus on. We need to urge the governments. We want the most effective model that will help our patients to have real innovation, to have real treatments, and to make them as accessible as well. And to do that, we should urge our government as well, including Ireland obviously, to also look at different models and not stick to the current model, even if we know that it's not necessarily delivering what we want. So let's follow up on that as well in the fall and afterwards. I'm happy to share more info on these opportunities afterwards as well.
Okay, thank you. Kieran, did you want to say something?
I think just thank you. Just to on the question, I think with the process that we've got a system which rewards marching up and down outside Leinster House and having to go through very difficult experiences, and we really need to have more of what we just heard about structured patient contributions. So the patients can contribute and influence the system, but influence in the same way as all other people influence the system. We don't see other disciplines or health professionals having to march up outside Leinster House to get heard. I think the other side of that, I think, is an interesting Dominic Coyle made in the comment in the Irish Times 2 weeks ago when he said that in Ireland, when in the UK, when a decision is made on whether a drug will be reimbursed or not, that's usually the end of the conversation. But in Ireland, when a decision is made as to whether it will be reimbursed, that's usually the start of the conversation, and everybody gathers around and prepares for battle. Often, it seems to me, with patients being exploited in the middle of that battle.
I think the challenge for patient groups is that you have like a fire in the house and you're trying to deal with it, or you've got you get dealt a bad hand. I mean, you've got diagnosis is tough of a genetic condition or something like that. You're just basically, most of your options in the short run are just trying to make sure you have coverage, you can find the resource to treatment, worried about actually getting, managing the treatment, all the associated things with it. So that's a lot of stuff to deal with. But there isn't a sustained effort to change the fundamental trajectory of the reimbursement scheme. I mean, if the reimbursement scheme is really based on the idea that when negotiations break down, you're not going to get coverage. If that's going to be repeated again and again, year in and year out, what I would like to see is more of a platform that you'd like some different strategy where the patients themselves are guaranteed that they really have access to everything, and ask policymakers to explain what are the policies that would make that happen. I mean, you start with the idea that you don't want fiscal toxicity, you want access. We're open-minded about the policies that would give us that, but those policies should deliver on all of those things. And if they don't, then we'd like you to investigate other policies. So, the compulsory licensing effort that some countries are looking at is one attempt to protect access. I proposed this delinkage thing, which I'm a big believer in, but it could be something different. MSF is very keen on some sort of different modifications, but the bottom line should be that the patient group should say, in addition to whatever short-term issue you have, to force policymakers to address a policy that doesn't put the patients at risk and doesn't involve fiscal toxicity. And that should be the sort of overarching demand across all the patient groups that can bring them all together.
Questions? Take one up here, and somebody else? Okay.
Hi, thanks
Will
very
you tell
much.
us your name again? Just
Brian Wall is my name from the Posey, and I was in Gavi in a previous life. Anyway, congratulations on the presentations. They were excellent, really wonderful. I have two questions. The first question is for James Love. He mentioned in relation to patient and doctors were involved and discussed the decision on whether they get the drug. In the context of the previous questioner around the black box, I'd love to know a little bit more about how that actually works. So that's my first question. The second question builds on a question that I had this morning, or an input, and this is in relation to the value of volume. So we saw from the slides that Dimitri presented that Gavi were getting their pneumococcal vaccines at $3.3. It's now down to 2.9 since last month. But they have 73 countries, so given that there could be 1 million children in each country, they're able to negotiate and leverage that reduction. So my second question relates to procurement, because we seem to be penalised by being a small country. And I'm just wondering, can the panel think about other tools that we might be able to use in relation to ensuring that medicines are more affordable? Thanks.
Okay, great.
Hi, yeah, my name is Sarah McLaughlin, I'm from American International. So I've one comment, I suppose, and one question. One comment is on the patient involvement, I guess, in the reimbursement process in Ireland. So currently there's a patient submission form that Kate Curtin referenced this morning, where patients can fill in and like say how their illness impacts them or how they would perceive the drug that's on offer would impact them. And then that goes into the HSE. And a lot of patients put a lot of effort into that, and they, talk to their communities and their patient organisations and their patients and ask questions, and they put a lot of effort into filling out this form blindly, because they've no idea what that form is being used for. They've no idea what information they should put into it. And there's really no transparency about what the impact of that form is, if any, on the reimbursement decision. So just as a point that while patients are trying to do something with in the legitimate system that's there, really we're working with blindfolds on. We've no idea how to actually make those legitimate impacts there with those kind of forms. So that's just our comment on it. My question then is, there's a lot of reference to the public support for research and academic research, and really the amount of money that's spent on that, and then a few points were made earlier that seems to be sucked up by pharma, and the pharma can charge whatever they want. So that side of things is a bit complicated, but I guess my question is really for people that aren't in the room. So the people that are in tech transfer offices in Ireland or in the rest of the world, people who fund academic research like SFI or HRB or Horizon 2020 from the ERC or the Wellcome. So what are they doing in terms of being responsible about what they're funding, and where does that go? So it's a general question, I guess, for people here. The answer that probably should be in this room. So that's another question.
Okay, great, thank you. So the first one was to James, who's about the black box again. The question related to the patient and doctor discussion and what actually went on.
Comparison. What exactly is somebody help me explain what the black box means?
Do you want to clarify?
Yeah, sorry. You were talking about the doctor-patient discussion in your earlier presentation that took place. That was so important to, if you like, ventilate some of the decision-making processes around whether a drug was made available or it wasn't. And the reason I mentioned black box was because a previous questioner mentioned to Michelle talking about the black box, which assuming was the whole decision-making process in the HSE.
Okay, thank you.
Well, when a doctor talks to an oncologist or a doctor for any other disease where there's an expensive medicine involved, in one university, in a parallel university, you can imagine the conversation is really just about what drug or treatment is best for the patient medically. And then, you go to where we are right now, and it's partly about that, but but sometimes it's also about whether or not the government's going to cover it, the private insurance is going to cover it. Does a patient have resources of their own that they can pay for it, and things like that. And so you bring all these ability to pay questions into the medical decision, and that's really an artifact of the way you finance R&D. The way you choose in Ireland to finance R&D is charge a sick person who's got cancer $100,000 a year. I mean, that's one way to do it, I guess. I don't think it's a very good way, but you do it because you think that's the only way. Now, so I think that each can't ignore the economics of the situation. Of course, the doctor's going to well, I don't know if the doctor's sensitive to it or not, but at least my wife's doctor, when she talked to him about, we've gone through this a couple of times trying to get on a different regime, and it's always a big drama about whether there's going to be a reimbursement or not. We're not fabulously wealthy, so for us, it's the conversations I have right now in our family right now is we'll talk about a drug, and then my wife will say, well, if they won't reimburse it, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to die. I don't want to give the drug company the satisfaction of just sucking all the money out of her household, and I'll be like, no, don't go down that road. But those are not only those are real conversations people have. I'm sure you all know that, but I mean, I know people that that have made the decision not to be a financial burden on their family and just go with that. I mean, that's just I feel like there's sort of lacking of kind of like wake up people kind of thing going on here where you just if that isn't evidence of a market failure. I mean, people talk about market failure, sometimes this market failure is when you don't get innovation. And so they'd say, well, the system works great except for tuberculosis or antibiotics where you don't have innovation. And I'd say, well, that's a problem, the lack of innovation is a problem, but unequal access, I also thought that was a market failure too. Or just ripping off the system. I mean, that's also, I think, paying too much for things. I think that's a market failure too. So I think that it's sort of surprising to me that patients are more HIV patients. You saw, like a wave of activism. I think, 15 years ago on this sort of thing. In some countries, not in every country. And it was probably a lot of smoke and mirrors about how much activism there was. I mean, to tell you the truth. I mean, certainly in the United States, it was literally dozens of people that were like making the government move because they were very committed and they were very active. But it's sort of a weird comment in society that we can accept such bad outcomes and such unfair outcomes without being mobilizing for action in some way.
Dimitri, do you want to address the issue around small countries and tools that can be utilised for procurement?
Yeah, just talking from the top of my head, obviously. So, first of all, I think it's interesting that it's not because Ireland is a small country, although I don't consider it so small, that it necessarily has to pay high prices. I mean, some of the highest prices are currently being paid in the US, which is a huge market. So one does not translate necessarily in the other, but I understand your point as well, and I do think from that perspective it's obviously interesting first to look at joint negotiations, joint procurement, which is actually the plan of the Benelux group to do this kind of work, to pursue that track. But additionally, I think to a large extent, it also relies on political will to really back up in negotiations and to look for This morning it was mentioned that in the Netherlands now pharmacies can produce some of the medicines themselves if they're not available to patients because of the high price, for example. That's the importance is not only that the patient just has access to it, but it kind of takes away the decision for governments to have no access or pay the excessive price. You know, there is a solution at that point that that particular patient or those patients at least get access to the medicine they need. Why you still negotiate a better price? And it takes away the pressure from you to accept the high price that is being offered. So international collaboration, look at different models, like the pharmaceutical production, the pharma production, local pharmacy production. I also have to think about Spain, who is currently seeking ways to do their own CAR-T treatments. The CAR-T treatment that was mentioned before, which is priced in the UK about €350,000 per patient. And Spain is looking at trying to do it themselves for 50,000. So that's already 1/7 of the price, if I'm not mistaken. So there are different models to do things yourself, to kind of take away that power that you only rely on a company's excessive price. The third point I want to make has to do still with the patent system. One is compulsory licensing. It has been mentioned. You can break the patent legally. It's possible. It's a safeguard that has been implemented or included in the patent law, exactly to prevent abusive pricing. So let's make use of that legal option. I want to respond to a point that was raised this morning as well about the impact that it can have on innovation. It's interesting that the US Bureau for Economic Research actually made the point that limiting exclusive rights, even the use of compulsory licensing, can help innovation. And the rationale behind it is quite logical in a way. If you think about it, if a company has one product with excessive prices and can continue to have huge profits based on one product, it's not pushed to innovate more new products. It's actually by putting a cap on it and by preventing that it continues to extract resources from this one product that it will be driven to innovate in new products. So for me, that point that was raised this morning does not really make sense. And actually, it's not only me, it's actually the US Bureau for Economic Research, which is quite a recommended institute that made that point. Final point, patent oppositions. My organization, I mean, we mentioned Sopos-Bavir Sovaldi a few times, both Michel and myself did it. My organization filed a patent opposition here in Europe on the patents on Sovaldi, Sopos-Bavir, because we think that patent should not have been granted, because legally and from a scientific point of view, according to our analysis, it was not patentable. It should not have been patented in the first place. So the whole discussion about the price of that product we could have avoided. And for that perspective, we are legally challenging actually the patent on the product. And it is an option that we have used in a number of countries where we work, in India as well, successfully, in South Africa as well, on a number of products to make access to more affordable products. So there are a number of options. There are probably more that are mentioned, but I don't want to keep talking here.
I was going to ask Aoife whether you've come across the impact on patient form. I suppose it's related to quality of life. Is that something you've come across?
The patient group report for them going to the National Centre for Pharmacoeconomics, so the patient group submission, is that?
Yeah, the patient submission form.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's something that certainly patient organisations as a whole could maybe ask for some transparency on, in terms of if there isn't a kind of current understanding of how that fits into the decision making and how it impacts, the kind of potential impact of it, or the kind of information that would be most relevant to be in there. I think that that's something that patient organisations should absolutely seek clarification on, if that answers your question.
Okay, great. And just the final question, which was in relation to funders, and what are funders actually doing in terms of their stance in terms of funding research into pharmacology and production of medicines. So do you want to take that from the panel? You come across that?
What do you mean by funders? Yeah, I don't have the question. What do you mean by funders?
It's the funders who fund the research. So they're people who are not in the room, I think it was the way it was described. So the people who fund research, do you know what they're doing, or what they could be doing to actually put a requirement in for people they're funding in terms of ensuring that the price of medicines that are produced is fair and equitable?
So
but
So am I right in saying that? Yeah, okay.
yeah, if you want, you can go ahead and I'll
All right. Well, the people that fund the research and development is you have the nonprofit funders like governments and charities. I think Leukemia Foundation. I mean, some of the nonprofit charities are very aggressive on exclusive licensing, and they're not really concerned about the price. Maybe some others are. We've asked about over 30 times in the last 3 years for the National Institutes of Health in the NIH-owned patents to put conditions on affordability and access. And they rejected every request we made for the past. And we did several with NSF, for example. So the NIH is not been a good actor, but maybe in another president, maybe that will change if we have another president down the road. I think the typical story we have with the government funder is that the technology transfer people are typically very close to the industry, and they'll tell you the story that, well, nobody really wants this technology. They won't take it if we put any conditions on pricing. They don't want you to put conditions on pricing because the NIH, for example, the scientists themselves get up to $150,000 per year in royalties on top of their salary if the thing is, if it works out well, and they're trying to raise that to $500,000 a year on top of their salary. And then the likelihood of them getting any royalties at all depends on whether it makes it to the end, and so they think anything that makes the product less attractive to private investors, who they depend upon to do the final part of the development, will reduce the chances it becomes commercialized. So they just fight tooth and nail against any kind of reasonable pricing thing. And I really haven't seen much evidence in Europe that the governments are placing many strings on affordability. I mean, I think it's even worse. The licenses are often secret. The NIH doesn't publish its licenses. You can get sometimes a license from the company through the Securities and Exchange Commission, but the government itself won't make them available because they think it's if there's some secret. If you give an asset that possibly is worth billions of dollars to a company for $150,000 plus a royalty or something like that, everything about the transaction is secret. The term, the royalty rate, any of the licensing terms. You couldn't sell a chair or a table or an acre of land or a building under such secrecy, but you can do that with assets worth huge amounts of money right now from government funders. It's a very untransparent area, and that actually it should be fixed.
Okay, great, thank you. Just time for one more question. Does anyone have a question? Somebody like? Yeah.
Just on the small country thing, I just wanted to add something. I mean, Ireland's a small. What's the population of Ireland? 5 million. Well, I think that qualifies as a pretty small country. So there's some disadvantages, but some advantages of a small country. Now, so take the United States, a very big country. If we screw up the innovation system, the whole world will notice, and everyone will get mad. If Ireland got rid of its patent system tomorrow, or extended the patents to 100 years, nobody would really notice. So that gives you an extra amount of freedom. You can actually be a center of innovation. You don't have to be a conformist because you have, in a way, the small size that you have allows you to kind of fool around and try different approaches. The other thing is that it probably means if you're trying to get generic production, it probably means you might want to initially focus on small molecules in terms of compulsory license or technologies like RT, where even the University of Pennsylvania or one university can basically figure out how to engineer and manufacture the cell. So I think that there are opportunities on the supply side that are kind of constrained by your size, but politically you have some advantages because you're small in some ways, you have more freedom to fool around.
Just we're running out of time, so just a quick response. I just want to take just one more question.
Take the question, it's fine.
Yeah, okay. Joanna?
Thanks. So I'm Ashley McMahon and I'm a lecturer in the law department in the Meath. My area is patents and health. This is really fascinating discussions. My question is just to Jamie and Dimitri mostly. In terms of the patent system, there are exclusions, and you mentioned some of them within patent law already. There's like the flexibilities and trips, there's also the ethical restrictions. But much of the issues has been there's no kind of willingness for institutional change or to use those. So on paper it looks like you have exceptions for health, but in reality they don't get used in practice. I could see similar issues arising with delinkage. Delinkage being a great proposal, but how do you get that institutional change? How do you get the change within patent law to get governments to use those exemptions more? And also in terms of delinkage, how do you get the change to get them to maybe delink? Do you have any insights from the panel on that? And just a related point in terms of compulsory licensing, so the Sabotavir drug that we talked about, hepatitis C, Malaysia and other countries have given a compulsory license for that. So in terms of public procurement, if more countries were to do that type of thing, arguably you could have more change. But how do you get countries to do that in the current climate?
Dimitri, do you want to address the first part and then perhaps
It's $1 million question. I think it's really hard, and it's just a matter of political will in the end. I want to point out, because the issue was raised this morning as well. The point was raised that only developing countries that use compulsory licensing. The United States actually threatened to use a compulsory license on Cypro during the anthrax crisis in 2001, and that in itself, the threat was enough to let the price plummet, and they didn't even have to use it. So the force of the threat of using compulsory licensing itself is quite strong, and that shows the level of bargaining power that you can have with the use of this compulsory licensing. But I mean, in the end, yeah, it comes down to political will. So that it needs to be a politician who is willing to make the decision based on, I want to serve the patient needs, and the patient should get access to this treatment, and that takes priority on any other considerations. That would be my point.
Okay, thanks, Dimitri. James, do you want to deal with that delinkage issue?
Yes, well, also, just in terms of delinkage, one area where the U.S. has done a lot of compulsory license lately are in cases involving injunction cases, starting with a lawsuit initially against eBay, the online auction. Patent owners sued and tried to get an injunction to shut down the eBay site, which was beloved and used by many Americans to sell stuff. And the Supreme Court ruled that injunctions were not automatic even when you had an infringement, and one of the things you had to consider is whether or not a compulsory license was an alternative. And since then, it's been fairly routine. I mean, it's not like automatic, but there's at least one a month that seems to be generating some kind of compulsory licensing decision out of an injunction case. There's been quite a few in the medical area, in the medical device and diagnostic area, and less so in the drug area, but certainly a lot of the other areas of the technology sector. In terms of how to get people to engage in delinkage, well, I think that one thing that we've asked for is that there be a feasibility study by some third party, because I think we do good analysis in our organization, but we will be discounted just because we're perceived as advocates. And so we think that for governments to move, they have to have their own government-led or some kind of research institute that they choose that they believe is independent and credible. And so we pushed this down. In 2017, there was a proposal of WHO to have the World Health Organization do a feasibility study of whether or not you could introduce a cancer innovation fund for a club of countries to delink in the area of cancer treatments, which was really a tough area. But that was a resolution. That was the most controversial part of the cancer resolution, and it was opposed really vigorously by the United States and by the drug companies. And that had to be closed out the day before the World Health Assembly started in 2017, so it couldn't even be on the table, even in brackets, because they were so worked up about it. So just so you know, one of the more controversial things is, believe it or not, a feasibility study of something that the industry is telling you won't work. So you're not allowed to do your own feasibility study, even though they're going to tell you it doesn't work. And of course, it wouldn't actually work, then they would be encouraging you to do a feasibility study, right? So this may sound kind of like pedestrian, but I think that a feasibility study with good terms of reference for a delinkage study, and the terms of reference I think are important, is strategically the most important thing to think about, because there's like a lot of different approaches you can sort of get the ball rolling. Some people say you can start with a select type of diseases. Andrew Whitty was the former CEO of GSK. He proposed you start with rare diseases, for example. Other people say, well, do it with FC or do it with AIDS drugs or something like that. There's like different ways you could approach it, but these feasibility studies would make things more concrete and credible for policymakers. And then patient groups would then approach the government and say, look, you're asking us to have this very awkward conversation about prices where when it goes badly, it goes really badly for us. you know, but the feasibility study says that that's an unnecessary risk that you put patients at. You know, why don't we sort of move in that direction? Right now, the patients don't even know that such a, you know, I mean, you know, to really make that demand, you have to have those kind of feasibilities before you can do anything really considered to be radical like this.
Just quick.
Yeah, very brief. One thing to understand as well is obviously that policymakers or government officials are obviously scared about the threat that a pharmaceutical company might leave the country, that the jobs might escape from the country, the economic impact of using, for example, compulsory licensing or the litigation model. And I think it's also important for us to address this risk or this threat in the sense of this threat is being made constantly all over the place. It's not only in Ireland. So we haven't seen that happening in reality. Even when I mentioned the US threatened to use compulsory licensing, the pharmaceutical industry didn't leave the US. Additionally, it's important to raise to governments officials as well. So we pay, you know, super high prices here for medicine. For example, for cancer treatments, we heard the point this morning about certain cancer treatments not being available for all the patients in Ireland anymore, but only to privately insured patients. You know, is that the price you're willing to pay for keeping certain jobs? You know, that our aunts and uncles do not get access to the cancer treatments, that our hepatitis C patients are not being treated anymore, that they don't get access to this treatment. Is that the price that we're willing to pay to keep some of the companies here? I mean, I'm not saying that we have to scare companies off either, but it's just, you know, that's what you're telling us, basically. So, and it's not acceptable.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to bring the panel presentations and discussion to a close. Just to say that it's been thought-provoking in terms of what has been presented, but also in terms of the discussion. And I have no doubt this will go on and on as an issue. So just to thank James, Aoife, Dimitri, Michelle and Kieran for their presentations, and also to thank you as the audience for spending the time to come to this session this afternoon. And we're going to move on to the close of the day. Okay. So just give a